On January 15th, 1919, it is an unusually warm winter afternoon in the North End. Children are playing in the street, workers are eating lunch in the sun. 50 feet above them stands a steel tank holding 2.5 million gallons of molasses. In a few seconds, that tank will tear itself apart, and a wall of molasses 3 stories high will come down the street at 35 miles an hour. 21 people will not survive it, and the reason it happened was hidden under a coat of brown paint. Keep the paint in mind, it's the whole story. Let's start with why there was a giant tank of molasses in the middle of a city in the first place. In the early 20th century, molasses was not just for food. It was the raw material for industrial alcohol, and industrial alcohol was used to make munitions. During the First World War, that made molasses a wartime resource. A company called United States Industrial Alcohol built a massive storage tank in Boston's crowded North End, right on the waterfront, to hold the molasses shipped up from the Caribbean before it was distilled. The tank was 50 feet tall and 90 feet across. When full, it held 2.3 million gallons. And here is where the trouble begins. The man put in charge of building it, a company treasurer named Arthur Gell, had no training in engineering or architecture. He couldn't read a blueprint. He rushed the construction, he never had the design properly tested, and when the tank was finished, he filled it with water to check it for leaks only once, and only to a depth of a few inches. Then, he filled it with molasses. The tank leaked from the very beginning. The leaking was so obvious, so constant, that the company had to respond to it. And the way they responded tells you everything. They painted the tank brown. Not to seal it, not to fix it. They painted it brown so the molasses leaking down the sides would be harder to see. The leak wasn't a warning to them. It was a public relations problem. Hold on to that, because it comes back at the very end. Now, the day of the disaster. The 15th of January 1919 was strangely warm. The temperature had climbed above 40 degrees after days of bitter cold. 2 days earlier, the tank had received a fresh shipment of warm molasses from the Caribbean, filling it nearly to the top. Just after 12:30 in the afternoon, witnesses heard a sound. Some described it as a deep rumble. Others said it sounded like machine gun fire, which was the rivets popping out of the steel, one after another. And then, the tank came apart. 2.3 million gallons of molasses burst out all at once. We tend to imagine molasses as slow. That instinct is exactly what makes this story so hard to believe. In that volume, under that pressure, the molasses formed a wave that witnesses estimated at 25 feet high, the height of a 3-story building. And it moved at an estimated 35 miles an hour, faster than a person can run, faster than they could have run even if they'd understood what was coming. The wave hit the North End with the force of a flood. It knocked buildings clean off their foundations. It buckled the steel supports of the elevated railway and nearly dropped a train onto the street below. It swept people, horses, and carts toward the harbor. And then, as it spread and cooled, it did the thing that made it so deadly. It began to thicken. People caught in it, even those who survived the initial wave, were trapped, unable to move as the molasses set around them like wet cement. Rescuers waded in and found they could barely move themselves. 21 people died. Around 150 were injured. Some of the victims were not found for days. The cleanup is almost as staggering as the disaster. Molasses coated the streets, the harbor, the buildings, several feet deep in places. Rescue and cleanup crews used salt water from the harbor to break it up and sand to soak it in. It took weeks of constant work just to clear the streets. The harbor stayed brown until summer. And rescuers, workers, and onlookers tracked molasses through the city on their shoes, into streetcars, onto train platforms, into homes. For months, much of Boston was faintly sticky. Residents of the North End would swear for decades afterward that on a hot day, you could still smell molasses rising from the ground. But the most important part of this story isn't the cleanup. It's what happened in the courtroom. The victims and their families sued United States Industrial Alcohol. The company's defense was bold. They argued that the tank had not failed because it was badly built. They claimed it had been blown up, sabotaged, destroyed by anarchists with a bomb. It was the perfect excuse for the era. In 1919, fear of anarchist bombings was real and widespread, and blaming a faceless radical would have cost the company nothing. The case became one of the largest and longest legal proceedings Massachusetts had ever seen. For years, expert witnesses examined the evidence, and what they found was simple. The steel walls of the tank were too thin. The structure could not safely hold what it was built to hold. It had been failing from the day it was filled, exactly as the leaks had been screaming the entire time. There was no bomb. There was only a tank that never should have been standing, and a company that painted over the proof. The Boston Molasses disaster became a turning point in how things get built. It is widely cited as one of the reasons engineers and architects are now required to sign off on structural plans, with their work certified and submitted to the authorities before construction. The idea that a man who couldn't read a blueprint could order a 50-foot tank built over a crowded neighborhood, and that no qualified person had to approve it, died in that courtroom. So here's where the paint comes back. The molasses leaking down the sides of that tank was not a cosmetic problem. It was the structure telling everyone, every single day, that it was failing. The company heard that warning, understood it, and made a decision. They didn't reinforce the tank. They didn't drain it. They reached for a bucket of brown paint and made the warning harder to see. 21 people died because a leak was treated as an embarrassment instead of an alarm. A wave of molasses 3 stories tall came down a Boston street at 35 miles an hour. And the most unbelievable part isn't the molasses. It's that everyone involved had been warned in plain sight for years. That's real. If this one got you, the like button helps more than you'd think. And if you want more stories that should be fiction but aren't, we post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next.